My name is David Rivinus, and I am an analyst of dreams. I do dream interpretations, and I hold workshops, and I do classes, and I have individual sessions with people. When I was still in college, the last couple of years, I started working at a mental health clinic. This was back in the late 1960s. And in those days, the federal government did not as yet have a program set in place for special education. So any kids with special needs ended up getting education at a mental health clinic. And so I became a teacher as part of an internship at a mental health clinic locally where I was going to college. And while I was in this internship, one of the things that the staff at the mental health clinic especially encouraged was that those who were working at the clinic continue their education in psychology by going to any workshops, any seminars that were available. And one time I went to a workshop that was being run by some people who were devotees of a man named Fritz Perls, who was a great psychiatrist and who was one of the founders of the Gestalt movement of psychology. And these guys worked especially with dreams. And even though the Gestalt work that we were doing in general was very interesting to me, when it got to the dream part, I was completely fascinated. And that was when my work with dreams began. I started off using the Gestalt method and continued to use that technique over a time period, eventually developing my own method and maybe taking it to a slightly more metaphysical realm in which to work from dreams. Their approach was specifically about the psychological relevance of dreams. I was more interested in the spiritual realm, the spiritual relevance of dreams. When I developed my own method of working with dreams, one of the things that became very interesting to me was the idea that dreams don't stop when we wake up in the morning. Most dreams speak in metaphors. We all know about dream symbols. And so dreams communicate with us through these symbols, which are really metaphoric communications. If you take a symbol like, let's say, a car. Well, a car is really a vehicle. If you think about it metaphorically, it's a vehicle. And a vehicle doesn't necessarily have to be a physical vehicle. It can be a vehicle to take you to your goal. It can be a vehicle for expression. It can be a vehicle for spiritual enlightenment. So dreams, if we dream about a car, it is a vehicle, but we might be actually dreaming about something that really has nothing to do about physical locomotion. Well, the idea that this kind of communication, this metaphoric communication, happens not only when we are asleep at night, but continues throughout our daytime experiences, was one that came as a great surprise to me. And I wanted to find out if we could, in fact, take the experiences of our awakened lives, the experiences we have during the day, and treat them as if they were dreams. And I can give you an example. There was a woman I was working with who dreamed actually several dreams that she had at night, the typical kinds of dreams, which I call sleeping dreams, where she was involved in an automobile accident. And then one day she was driving down the road. Now this is in her awakened state. And she actually had a car crash in which she ended up being left. Her car ended up in the woods and it smacked into a tree and nobody found her till the next day. She was lying there and she was okay, actually. But when I talked with her, one of the things we talked about was how there are two ways to look at this. One way is to say, well, you had some dreams during your sleep that were prophetic. And so they were prophesying the fact that you were going to have this accident during your awakened state. There's another way to look at it, and that is to say that the same experience happened both during your sleep and during your awakened state, what I call a waking dream. And the reason that I can say that is because not all of these kinds of awake experiences are preceded by by a dream that you have when you're asleep. A lot of times these experiences happen to us without any warning at all. And there are three kinds of waking experiences, waking dreams, that fall into the category of ones I would say that are really important, that need to be dealt with, that need to be examined. A dream that's shocking, like an automobile accident. A dream that's bizarre, and I can give an example of that. A guy was going from his office to a conference, and he was getting in his car, and as he was taking the keys to his car out of his pocket, he accidentally let them go and they dropped out of his hand, and there happened to be a sewer grate right there, and the keys slipped through the sewer grate down into the sewer, and he couldn't get to his conference. Now that's a totally bizarre experience. That's the kind of thing that does not happen to you maybe once in a lifetime. And so that's the kind of experience that I would say that's an important waking dream. That's one that you need to look at. The third kind is a repetitive one. If you have the same experience, I've been taking this same route for 20 years and I've never been stopped for speeding. Well, 2 months ago I got stopped for speeding. And then 3 weeks later I got stopped again for speeding. And can you believe it? Yesterday I got stopped a third time for speeding. Okay, well, you can say that's a coincidence. But it's been my experience, actually, that it's not coincidental, that these experiences come into our lives in the same way that dreams come into our lives when we're asleep at night. And they come into our lives for exactly the same reason, that there is a message that's coming, first of all, from our subconscious, but also from a realm beyond that, that is trying to communicate with us and probably give us a little bit of a course correction. It's really important not to generalize too much about dream symbols, because even though there are certain kinds of dream symbols, most dream symbols, in fact, are to a certain extent what we call archetypical. That means that there's a commonality of dream symbols with everyone who has that symbol, and that symbol comes into their dream. It's also true that that archetypical connection is also overlaid with a very personal experience. Now, let me give you an example. We all have mothers. We've all had the experience of, maybe good or bad with a mother, but we all are born of mothers. That is absolutely archetypical and universal. That goes to every single human being that ever lived on the planet. In that sense, you can say that the dream symbol of the mother is that part of life that gives us life. In that sense, it's archetypical. But if I were to line up 10 people and say to each of them, tell me about your mom, I think you would agree that you would get 10 completely different responses about their attitudes toward their mothers and their relationships with their mothers, and the very first instincts in terms of emotional reaction that comes to them when they think of their mothers. So in that sense, a mother is a universal symbol, but at the same time, it's a completely unique symbol to everyone who has it. Now, the same thing is true of all symbols that we have. Another common one is a house. People often dream about a house. Well, okay, a house is where you dwell. Symbolically, the house is where you live. And that then can be taken in any direction, not just physical living, but where you live in your consciousness, where you live in your mind, where you live in your emotions, where you live in your desires, where you live in spirit. All of those things are part of the house. Well, so if somebody dreams about a house, That's the universal part of it. That's the part that is archetypical. Now it becomes very personal. Well, what do you think of your house? Well, what kind of a house did you dream about? Well, the roof was leaking, or the bathrooms were too small, or it had this wonderful living room where hundreds of people were assembled and we had this great party. Well, so all of a sudden, this archetypical dream symbol becomes a very personal experience, becomes a very unique symbol to the individual who's doing the dreaming. Here's another one, very common, water. Water is a dream symbol that everybody has from time to time. So, well, what's water? Well, water is the source of life. I mean, if we don't have water, we will die. Okay, so again, that's universal, that's archetypical. Everybody knows that they have the experience that if they don't have water in their lives, they're not going to survive. Okay, now somebody who's out swimming along the coast of California and gets bitten by a shark is going to have a very different experience and a very different attitude about water than someone who, let's say, works for a purified water bottling company, where for them, water is all about, giving somebody a really healthy alternative. So again, there is this, it's not really a paradox, but a dichotomy for sure between what is considered a universal symbol in dreams and what is then people's own experience that gets overlaid over that universal symbol and becomes a very, very personalized experience. Somebody who has been bitten by a shark in the ocean dreams of the ocean. They are going to have a negative, or perhaps a better way to say it is they are going to have an attitude about water that is associated with fear and trauma and disaster. Whereas someone who is a surfer and has been surfing his or her whole life and just experiences nothing but the exhilaration and the fun and the camaraderie and the society and all the things that go with that, if they have a dream about an ocean, they're going to have a very different attitude and a very different symbolism that's associated with that. The idea that dreams happen during the day while we're awake is one that is relatively new to me in my dream work. And it's one of the most exciting parts of it, because people will tell you, well, I have no dream recall. I don't remember my dreams. And yet if you tell them, okay, I can tell you right now that you are dreaming all throughout the day. And if you will pay attention to those experiences you have during the day that don't leave you alone, that you have, and they stay with you, they're aggravating, or they create an abrasion in your own mind, and you don't let them go. Those are the ones that are important to examine. And I will give you an example of someone I was working with who had an experience like this. This is a man who was about my age, late 50s, early 60s. And he had just been to the doctor. He was a little bit overweight. And his doctor had told him, your diet and your weight are such that you're a really good candidate for type 2 diabetes. And I really strongly recommend that you make some changes in your life. And I recommend a healthier diet, and I recommend exercise and all the things, and a little bit of a weight loss. So he came home full of all kinds of good intentions, but you know how that goes. Old habits die hard. And because he enjoyed the experience of eating so much, he belonged to one of these food clubs where you could go and buy food in large quantities. You paid an annual membership, and you would buy food in large quantities, and then you get these great discounts on them, and you saved quite a bit of money over the year. But the trick is that you had to buy in large amounts. Well, one of his favorite breakfast foods was orange marmalade. And he ended up going to this club shortly after his doctor's appointment, and he found there that these huge jars of orange marmalade were on sale. And he bought 3 of them because he loved orange marmalade so much, and he brought them home. Well, he was trying to get in the door of his house from his car, and he's carrying these jars, all 3 jars of orange marmalade, and he got as far as his kitchen, okay, but on his kitchen, there is this ceramic tile floor. And as he was walking into the kitchen, he just slightly stumbled a little bit, and all 3 jars flew out of his hand onto this tile floor, and every one of them smashed completely on his floor. Well, so instead of spending the morning doing what he had intended, he ended up spending it on his hands and knees, cleaning up all of this orange marmalade. You can imagine that it was all over his kitchen floor. It splattered up along, the bottoms of his cabinets, and it wasn't so bad on the tiles themselves, but it was the grout between the tiles where all the sticky marmalade was stuck. And he ended up, with a toothbrush scrubbing that's how he spent his entire morning. And what's more, not only was it a sticky mess that was unpleasant, but it was full of shards of glass. And so this was an experience that was really annoying to him. First of all, he loved the orange marmalade. And second of all, he ended up wasting a whole half of a day cleaning this up. And so it was one of these experiences that didn't leave him. He grumbled about it. He groused about this experience for hours after it was over, and actually for days. And he knew me, and he had worked with me before, and he recognized that anything that you grumble about and grouse about for a good length of time is something that you need to examine. And so he came to me and said, I think I need to work on this as a waking dream. And so we did. And so the idea that we would deal with this metaphorically was one that he had already experienced, and so he was ready to do that. So we did. We dealt with orange marmalade as a dream symbol. We dealt with shards of glass as a dream symbol. We dealt with a solid, hard floor surface and the kitchen, the place where you cook things. All of these were part of the dream symbol. And I won't go into detail in every single symbol, but basically what came out of his own analysis of his own dream symbols was that orange marmalade is something that he felt was really delicious and he enjoyed it, but was maybe not very good for him. Shards of glass were something hidden within this substance that was delicious but not very good for him, that was dangerous. That this whole mishap happened in his kitchen, which was the place where he cooks the food that sustains him. And that in this kitchen, there was this very hard surface on the floor that was unforgiving. And when he related this to his doctor's experience, I'm sure you and certainly he got the message right away that it was time that this was broken. This was a system that he had stumbled, and that it was time for it to be broken, and it was time for him to clean it up and to cook things on this unforgiving surface. And what that implied to him was that perhaps earlier in his life, the flooring had been, metaphorically speaking, much more forgiving. That all of us, when we're young and healthy and can afford to break the rules a little bit, that's easier than when we start getting older. Now, it's going to be less forgiving. The environment is going to be more exacting. It's going to take a greater toll. And that it was time for him in his new approach to living, in the place where he cooked his meals, and I mean this metaphorically now, the meals of life, that he had to be a good deal more careful. When I talk to people about dreams, one of the things that I really emphasize a lot is that it's important for them to understand that this is a really personal communication, that it's important not to overlay the dream symbols they have with a definition that someone else has come up with. As I said earlier, even the most archetypical dream symbols will have an element of personal experience to them. And the more they become aware of the dream symbols that they have in their life, the more they will see that the symbolism is being tailored specifically to them. The dreams become very personal. They become very poignant too. They become direct communications from the other side, for lack of a better way to say it. They are a course correction. They are a personal statement coming to them from the beyond. And it's a communication that goes on all their lives. In fact, the idea that, oh Lord, hear our prayers, that's a very common thing that you hear. It's actually ridiculous. There is never a time when the divine presence does not hear a prayer, and there's never a time when it is not talking to us. That communication is going on 24 hours a day, and it's up to us simply to learn the language that it speaks in. It doesn't always speak direct English or direct whatever language that is our native language. It speaks in the language of metaphor, which is a universal language. That's a language that every single human being on the planet speaks. And so it is in this universal language that the divine speaks to us. And if we take the time to learn that language and understand that that communication is going on 24 hours a day, we will never, ever feel as if we are isolated and alone and abandoned.